International, and now champions for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, for grassroots organization to global advocacy, from art to activism. Kumi continues to inspire action across generation. It's a great honor to welcome you here to the stage. Give him a warm applause and a lot of love. Kumi, Naidoo.
Dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say, don't have high expectations about the words that are about to come out of my mouth. I am here solely for one reason, and that is to provide some gender balance to the proceedings this evening. I want to engage you in a quick test. I'm going to pose a question and give you 3 options and ask you what your answer to them are. The question is, how is humanity performing in terms of meeting the greatest threat to peace and stability and security in the long term, and that is addressing the climate crisis that we find ourselves in? Option 1, no reason to panic. Our government and business leaders will get it together and will somehow prevent the worst of the catastrophe that is before us. Option 2, we are in a deep crisis, but the window of opportunity is still there, but it's fast closing, but it's still within human ingenuity, creativity, and capability to broaden that and move us away from the suicidal trajectory that humanity is in. And option 3, if I might be permitted to use a sentence from Afrikaans, from my country, South Africa, option 3 is, ons is deep, deep, deep in the gak. Okay? So all of you think that it's option 1, put up your hands. Nobody. All of you think that it's option 2, put up your hands. I'm seeing about 50%. Option 3, whoa. Option 2 and option 3 is in the same ballpark. If I'm brutally honest, there are days when I wake up when it's option 2. There are days when I wake up, it's closer to option 3. Certainly the day Donald Trump got elected, it was definitely option 3. But the most important message I would like to leave you with this evening. In the moment of history that we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that justifiably emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our lived experiences must, can, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, our courage, and our sense of humanity. Don't back, I'll leave it 6 minutes. When I speak to people these days, I'm more nervous than when I was a 15-year-old activist against the apartheid regime. The reason for that is sometimes people ask me this question. I wasn't going to say this, but after your speech, I brought this in. Kumi, have you heard of Martin Luther King? And I say, yes. He inspired me and many people in our struggle against apartheid. And then they ask me, what was his most famous speech was called? And I say, very hesitantly, I Have a Dream. And people shout back, yes, it was I Have a Dream, but when you speak, you have like a bloody nightmare. The forests are disappearing, the oceans are rising, fascism is on the rise, and so on. But therein lies the challenge for each and every one of us. How do we speak truth to power on the one hand without sanitizing the fact that humanity is in a desperately bad crisis? But how do we do it in a way that inspires, motivates, and sends a message to people that their participation, their voice, and their engagement is critically important? Now, we have been going to climate negotiations for 30 years, and we've been calling for a fab deal. Not a fabulous deal, but a fair, ambitious, and binding deal. But year after year, what we get is a flab deal, F-L-A-B, full of loopholes and bullshit. Imagine, the main cause of climate change, 86% of the cause of climate change is our addiction and the burning of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. But it took the UN climate negotiations 28 years before we could even mention fossil fuels in an outcome document. That's as absurd as Alcoholics Anonymous having 28 years of conferences before they get the courage to mention the word alcohol in the outcome document. So we must be very clear that we have to, let me put it to you this way. Imagine you go to work, right, in the morning, you come home at the end of the day, and then as you open the door, you come in, you see water as flowing just outside your bathroom. And as you pass the kitchen, you pick up the mop, you move to the bathroom, you open the door and you see, hey, I left the tap running and I left the stopper, and that's why there's an overflow. What do you do first? Do you start wiping the water first? Or do you turn off the tap first? Of course you turn off the tap first. And if we don't turn off the tap on fossil fuels, we are kidding ourselves that we are addressing the climate crisis. And we need to understand that the reason for this is too many of our governments are completely controlled by the fossil fuel industry. Do you know the war in Iraq, which was started on the same false premise as this attack on Iran? You know what it was originally going to be called, what it was called? Operation Iraqi Freedom. Do you know what it was called beforehand? It was called Operation Iraqi Liberation. And then somebody said, no, we can't call it Operation Iraqi Liberation because it spells oil and we'll be exposing ourselves exactly why we're engaged in that war. So what's happening now? The question that has been raised about NATO pushing up the budgets, I want to remind people of what the US President Dwight Eisenhower said in his last day in office. He warned America and the world. He said, I am deeply concerned about the growing power of the military-industrial complex. We ignore at our peril the rising power of the military industry because they will seek and promote wars for profit so that they can actually continue to make money. And it is no secret that many wars in Africa, for example, have been fostered by military-industrial needs to sell their weapons when people were not necessarily inclined towards war. So to NATO we say that when Donald Trump insists that you have to go for 5% costs and so on, he's not acting in the interests of the American people, he's not acting in the interests of anybody else than the military-industrial complex in the United States. So, in conclusion, I want to just say that, and I was asked to come up with some stories. So why is it we are failing? Why is it that activism and those that seek justice, human rights, and climate justice and so on, why are we failing? And I want to say to you up front, as the leader of the anti-colonial movement, Amilcar Cabral, from your part of the world in West Africa said, tell no lies and claim no easy victories. In the moment of history we find ourselves in, we need brutal truth. And after Archbishop Desmond Tutu's funeral in January 22, my son, who's a very popular musician in South Africa, sits me down and says, you know, you're really not good at what you do. In fact, people will say you are crap at what you do. I say, why, Ricardo, am I so bad? He says, well, you've been fighting for human rights, democracy, gender equity, sustainability, and so on since you were a child, teenager, since the age of 15. And when I look at the world, everything is going in the wrong direction. Now, if you couldn't achieve anything when you were young, why do you think now that you're old, you're going to make any impact? Why don't you just chill, spend more time with us and the grandchildren that you should have spent when you were unsuccessfully running around the world trying to save it? And then when I say, why is it? He said, the reason is you all aim all your messages and your narratives at the brain and you'll ignore the heart, the body, and the soul. And he said, look at Donald Trump. He bypasses the brain and he goes and weaponizes everything in the heart and he tells all sorts of crazy lies and he gets away with it. So I said, are you saying that we must lie? He said, no, I'm not saying you should lie like Donald Trump, but all I'm saying is you'll need to be less boring with the facts. The truth is, many of us who are activists talk a language that ordinary people don't understand. many things that were said here, including what I am saying, if we got ordinary people to watch, they would say, my God, they use a language, they use a sense of imagery and so on. It doesn't resonate with me. In my country, South Africa, where the apartheid system was built on educational disenfranchisement, the founder of apartheid said, blacks should never be shown the greener pastures of education. They should know that the station in life is to be use of wood and drawers of water. And our majority of the people were deprived of education. So in our struggle, we had to use song, we had to use dance, we had to use theater, we had to use all sorts of cultural forms. And that is why one of the movements that is emerging now is called the Global Artivism Initiative. And you can Google Global Artivism, and all of you here who are involved in arts and culture, I invite you to join, to bring your voice as equals. Because quite frankly, the voice of the arts and culture community today is going to be much more important than boring voices like myself. So I really think we need to create more space for arts and culture to be able to play its role to move people on a much larger base. So let me just say, mobilizing the power of arts and culture alone will not deliver us salvation from the climate crisis and the intersecting crises. However, failing to harness the power of arts and culture almost guarantees that we will fail. Now, the last story is from Durban. A feminist, in the last days of her life, not last days of her life, she had retired at the age of 85, right, in Durban, where I come from, which is a coastal city. And God comes into a room the night after a party, and God says to her, you have been such a faithful servant to the cause of gender equality. I want to give you one wish, any wish you want. And so she says, you know, God, the person that inspired me to become a feminist was a woman that lives in Mauritius. And can you build a bridge from Durban to Mauritius so I can drive and go and see her? Because at my age now, I'm freaked out by flying. And God tells her, listen, you know, I'm really disappointed that you feminists, you'll talk about intersectionality and all, and don't you understand the impact that's going to have on the environment if I have to build a bridge from Durban to Mauritius? And then God shakes his head, sorry, I can't give you that. You need to come up with another. And then she says, okay, can you, in 1 week, convince all the men in the world that if women are not fully free and women do not have the same power as men, that we will not stand a chance of achieving peace, justice, and equity in the world? And God, you know, he scratched his head and then he said, what was the timeline again?
1 week.
And she said, 1 week. And then he said, okay, in that case, how many lanes do you want on the bloody highway to Mauritius? Right? So, I want to say to the NATO leadership in conclusion, if you do not address the question of gender equity, if you deprive the voice of more than half the population on the planet in terms of all the decisions that you make, you are kidding yourself that you will ever come up with any solutions for peace. And the NATO leadership must understand that they are less than 13% of the world's population. And by the way, while we freak out about the US every day, all of us are freaking out, we must always remind ourselves that the US is less than 5% of the world's population. And people in numbers can make things happen. So I just want to end with this question to you. How many of you know where your ancestors come from? Shout it out.
Iran.
Iran, I want you to go even further back.
Afghanistan.
I want you to go even further back. I'm looking for an answer. I hope somebody's going to shout it out.
Mesopotamia.
Okay, there's some white people here shouting Africa, okay? Okay, so these white people shouting Africa are very well informed white people. Okay, because humanity started in Africa, in the West, in the Rift Valley, moved to Australia and came over to Europe and so on. And I really want to apologize to all the white people in the room. I'm so sorry in the process that you lost all your color. So I want to conclude in the spirit of artivism by teaching you a song. It only has 2 words in it. Pambili Africa, which means forward with Africa. And given that all our ancestors come from Africa, the song is forward to peace for people in the world. Okay, my son will be very upset with me. By the way, I should let you know that 6 weeks after I had that conversation with my son, he took his life. And we set up a foundation in his name, the Kiri Foundation for the Promotion of Artivism, which is building this movement to bring the power of arts and culture. He will be very pissed with me now for trying to sing in front of so many people, especially since I don't have any water. So, thank you. There's 2 words, Pambili, Africa, and you're all going to sing it with me. Pambili, 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 Africa. Pambili, 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 Africa. Okay, everybody now. Pambili, 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 Africa. Pambili, 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 Pambili.